Well, welcome to Ask a Responsive Fundraiser, where we take your questions to a fundraising expert so that ultimately you can grow generosity. Today, we're taking your questions to Miriam Dicks. With over 20 years of experience in business transformation, Miriam thrives on helping organizations streamline operations, embrace change, and achieve long-term success. As the founder and CEO of 180 Management Group, she partners with healthcare organizations, nonprofits, and government agencies to implement smart strategies that improve efficiency, leverage technology, and create lasting cultural shifts. Miriam, thanks for taking the time to answer some questions today.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, let's jump in with the first question. It's this: our internal teams really are siloed, and it's hurting our ability to create a consistent donor experience. So how can we adjust operations to improve collaboration without overwhelming people?
That's a really good question, because the first thing that comes to mind for me is, why are they siloed, right? It's one thing to assume that, they're siloed for one reason or another, but I think it's important to understand the why behind the silo. So if it's an issue where truly there isn't an overlap of work, that they are truly working within their own authority and they don't really have a lot of crossover, then it's important to create shared goals so that there is a reason to cross those boundaries, a reason to come together and collaborate. And so that's one aspect of it. But if it's truly an issue where, the work is shared, the goals are shared, and you're still very siloed, then maybe it's time to start doing some process maps. Which, on the surface sounds like, oh God, who wants to do that? But when you think about a process map, they can have swim lanes to show what each person's role is within a process and where the overlaps are, especially when it comes to data gathering and reporting. That makes it important for communication to flow. Especially if you're going to be talking to a donor, you want to make sure you have the most up-to-date information in your systems. You want to make sure that if anyone else has had contact with those donors, that it's recorded somewhere, that you can refer back to that information. If you've sent out a letter or any kind of correspondence, you want to make sure that no one else has done something that sort of impedes the work that's being done in your area. So I think those process maps really help with understanding who's on first and why it's important for us to come together.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and especially bringing it back to all about, the donor and being able to engage with that donor. That's so important.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Number two is this. It's that our executive team is aligned on strategy, but the execution breaks down somewhere in the middle. So what systems or routines can help make sure strategy gets translated into day-to-day action at every level?
What's common when it comes to strategic planning is that the goals that are outlined within that strategic roadmap are very top level goals. And so it's not really a surprise that the senior management team, the senior levels, the executives are very clear on what it is that they need to accomplish. The problem then becomes, how is that cascaded down to the rest of the organization? Right? Because if there's a breakdown between the senior levels of management and those who have different roles and responsibilities throughout the organization, then there may be a gap in communication as to how goals are tied together. In other words, one of the tools or tactics that we like to employ when it comes to strategy is in strategy deployment is cascading goals, which really is a systematic way of breaking down a goal into smaller bits for those who have responsibilities within certain areas, but also making sure that those smaller bits of the goal have a timeline. They have deliverables so that they feed into the major goal. So, having that exercise, going through that exercise of cascading goals down, you should be able to see from the very front lines all the way to the top levels how everyone's work is working together, feeding together, culminating into the larger organizational goals. And if you can definitely, if you do it that way, you can see where maybe there are some issues with clarity and communication and role or expectations.
Yeah, Yeah, that's a helpful encouragement to be able to see those things and to understand where those breakdowns may be happening. All right.
Absolutely.
Number three, we have the data, but getting our team to act on it is a challenge. So how can we build accountability so insights actually drive action across our organization?
This is another area where I think the why is important. Like, why don't we have the action associated with the insights? One of the things that I've noticed in my time working with organizations is that having data and knowing what to do with the data are two different things,
Yeah,
right? So you may have
very
a
true.
lot of data, but what do you do with it? What makes it an actionable insight and not just an insight? Right? And so, if we leave it up to our team or our direct reports to just figure out what to do with data, then we could really find that they're at a loss because you could be inundated with information, not know exactly what to do with it. So in that case, I'd say that making sure that there is a plan for the data, right? So, what is the data? What needs to happen with the data? Who needs to work with the data? And what's the goals
Yeah.
associated with working with that data, right? And then from there, you can tie it into performance, those performance metrics, right? So if you have your annual performance evaluations, you can tie those goals into those performance evaluations. But it really starts with having clarity around what's the action needed, right? Based on those insights. And then how can we develop that into some kind of work plan with a goal that we can tie into performance evaluations?
Yeah. Miriam, that's so helpful. And thank you so much for taking some time today to answer our questions, to provide some insight for folks, and to continue to help encourage nonprofit leaders and fundraisers. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. This is great. Thank you.